Yeah. All right. So, Kev, time for This Week in Trading History.
Yeah.
And so I uh, wanted to cover the TARP program. So that's the Troubled Asset Relief Program that the United States government implemented back on October the 3rd of 2008. And it's obviously been labeled the Main Street bailing out Wall Street event, right?
Yeah. It was
And
uh it was a
and so
it was a very emotional affair.
it was. And so let's kind of go through what happened back then. Obviously, we were in the midst of a serious financial crisis. Lehman already happened, right? And all these financial institutions were suffering, and everyone was fishing who's the next Lehman, right? Everyone was looking where is the next grenade gonna pin gonna get pulled, and the U.S. government, obviously by the encouragement of Ben Bernanke and company and Paulson, all the other ones, came in and they with the government and they passed through the TARP program, which was to provide $700 billion of emergency uh, expenditures to buy all sorts of troubled assets to stabilize the economy,
Yeah,
right?
think about that, 700 billion. And not
Yeah.
only that, I believe the assets weren't listed. So the government would basically they were asking for a blank check.
Right. They were asking for a blank check to stabilize the economy, and that doesn't sit well with anybody who, and this is the interesting part, right? Because everyone says, well, this is enriching the bankers and bailing them out. But the thing is that I always kind of look at it and ask the question, what if things really got out of hand and one after another these banks started going Lehman? I mean, that would have really have devastated everybody. I mean, I know it sounds like a bailout of Wall Street. And I certainly wasn't a benefactor of it, so I don't want to try to defend it. But sometimes you have to, when these things, this negative feedback loop just takes a life of its own, you have to nip it before the entire
Yeah, but
system fails,
Patrick,
right?
the question is who ended up being saved? Was it the equity holders, and should they
Yeah.
have been saved? There's other countries have chosen to do different things that actually zeroed a lot of the equity holders and or the bond holders and saved the depositors because that's in
Yeah.
essence what you who you really should have been saving.
Right.
So
You're
we don't want
absolutely
to
right.
get
I'll agree
into
with that.
that's right. We don't want to get into too much of a philosophical discussion because it is this week in market history. So, but I will take the other side of your trade and say that there would have probably been a better way to do it, and it wasn't just a case of them stabilizing the economy for the good of Main Street. They
Yeah.
definitely took advantage of the situation, and it wasn't. It was only a year later they were writing themselves big bonuses again. So, I call
Well, listen,
BS on
let's
that
clarify.
kind of view.
Just to clarify, so it was something like $426 billion that was ultimately invested, and that was invested in three ways. It was either they got equity warrants into the company, or direct equity, or senior debt securities that were collected or bought by the Treasury. And a part of that is the companies that ultimately, all these different institutions ended up taking some money, but it did limit executive compensation initially.
Initially,
Obviously, like when they paid it back, they could do whatever they wanted, right? It was during the period when they accepted that money that they were under certain limits in terms
okay,
of that
so I was
executive
wrong. It was
compensation.
2 years, and they were paying themselves big bonuses again. I was wrong, but yeah,
But you know what?
they
They did. I think the entire TARP program was unwound by 2014, right? I think that sounds about
yeah.
right. And the government got paid back in most part uh, all the money that they used, and it did stabilize the situation, but it does bring to question. And you know what? I don't mean to take one side or the other. You know, we're Canadians. It wasn't our skin in the game over there, but it certainly was one very interesting moment in history.
Oh, and do you remember the moment when it failed the first time? I distinctly remember watching the TV and watching it go through, and everyone was saying things like, "Oh, they wouldn't have brought it for a vote if it wasn't gonna pass," and the market was sitting there, and then all of a sudden the nays added up, and there wasn't enough votes, and the market was like, "Holy shit!" and it just went no bid.
Wow.
It was just crazy. I distinctly remember that point where we were watching it because like all the news, the financial news networks were actually putting that screen of the actual, what is it? I guess is it the House of Representatives? Like I guess
Right.
does it go through there first? But anyways, where they're all voting, and it had like the live ticker, and it was like we were watching it, and then all of a sudden we were like, holy shit, it didn't pass, and then all of a sudden they just started wailing on the spoos, and it was ugly. Really
Yeah,
ugly. That was
such
done,
an ugly time in the market for sure.
Oh, and it was such an ugly day because it was in an e-liquid session, like in the afternoon, because this didn't have, like, the vote was at 2:00 or something, and it just went no bid. And then I think Paulson was really worried that it was going to get, it was going to turn into something really ugly. And there's that famous picture with him down on his knees begging Pelosi to pass it.
Wow.
And yeah, there was just, and anyways, it was unprecedented times, and it was one of those history-making moments that people will remember for the rest of their lives.
It will. There'll be big stories about that even 100 years from now, for sure.